and, if necessary, destroy media narratives of George Samueli. It is 9:07 p.m. in Central Europe, and I have to say it again, it's already pitch black outside, which clearly indicates that the days are definitely heading towards the 0 point, and the dismal days of fall and winter. But that's my bête noire. Welcome everybody who has joined me. Robert, I mean, this is a great start. Thank you very much, Robert, for your generosity. And Robert says, I'm already feeling lethargic this 4th. Yes, I should have said it is July the 4th. So congratulations to everyone in the United States, and happy birthday. So anyway, I'm already feeling lethargic this 4th, even though I've not had a single dog. Oh, a hot dog. Yeah, okay. It's not a single dog. Yeah, I thought what you were thinking. What dog you're thinking of? Yeah, it's not had a single dog. Great post yesterday on the inscrutability of Trump foreign policy goals. Thank you very much. But hard to see how they could be any worse than the animated cadavers. I agree with you. I agree, and they aren't any worse. I mean, they're in fact in some ways better, in that there's at least some hope, however distant, that things could change. We have to assume, I mean, at least hope for the best, that Trump won't want this war hanging over him through his administration, because, as I said during the podcast, that it will in no time at all, within days, become Trump's war, and he'll be blamed for everything. Every single thing that's going wrong in Ukraine will be Trump's fault. We know exactly that. Nancy Pelosi, just like she said, she helpfully referred to COVID as the Trump virus. That's nice, the Trump virus. It's all his. So this will be Trump's war, and they're gonna. And the Democrats will be much more ruthless about it than the Republicans were, because the Republicans should have said Ukraine is Biden's war. Biden is solely responsible for this. Biden should never have got involved. Biden should never have sabotaged the peace talks in March and April of 2022. It is Biden's war, and the hundreds of thousands who are dead are on Biden's conscience. That's that's how you should have played the game. But instead, the Republicans wanted to show, we're as much, if not more, anti-Putin than you are. In fact, Biden is being too soft on Putin. So Trump, if he has any sense, he will want to wrap this war up as soon as possible. Now, I'm assuming that he's not going to say, okay, well, the way I'm going to wrap it up is by threatening Putin and threatening Russia with bombing. You can't exactly tell with Trump. I don't think he will do that. But you never know. I mean, he may subscribe to the sort of the madman theory, where he's going to keep everyone guessing as to what he intends to do. So if he does intend to bring this war to an end, I'm assuming that the most rational way of bringing this war to an end is by cutting off Ukraine from any further money, any further armaments. The problem that Trump would then have to face is how great will the resistance on the part of the deep state be to such an act from Trump. We know that they resisted Trump's withdrawal from Syria plans, and they resisted Trump's withdrawal from Afghanistan plans. I mean, in neither case did Trump press his case very strongly, and that of course worked against him, because he could still turn around in 2020 and say, yeah, but you haven't actually got out of any of these wars. You said you would get America out of these wars, and they're still there. America is still in Syria. America is still in Afghanistan. So this is a matter of finding out whether Trump has learned his lessons and will therefore really take on the powerful forces and get out of Ukraine, cut Zelensky off and say, that's it, it's over, you're on your own, work something out with Russia. And Russia, I think, would be very eager and willing to bring this to an end. I don't think Russians want to continue with this war. And I think some peace overture from Trump early in his administration, I think the Russians will be very positively disposed. But if he doesn't do it early, then I think he's going to have problems on his hands, because I think then as I said, the war will be his war, and then the resistance to him would be much more decisive, because we know that all these people like Lindsey Graham and the rest of them, they're fanatics, and they would indeed impeach Trump if he wants to get out of Ukraine. But as if a couple of years go by, Trump will be a weakened position, and I think then the Lindsey Grahams will be quite eager to stick the knife into Trump. So if Trump does it very quickly, very early in his administration, then I think Lindsey Graham will have difficulties putting up much of a resistance. But the longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be for Trump. So I think the ideal solution for Trump would be get it out of the way as quickly as possible, before it becomes Trump's war, and before all the forces within the government, within Congress, get together and resist any attempt to bring this to an end. All right, but thank you very much, Robert. So let me go back to the locals page, and let me see these. Yeah, the question, and here we have Cynthia. Always very good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia says, hello, George. Don't you think if you look at the far right as only being the far right within the center right, its stance is anti-NATO, but it tends to be pro-Israel, though. Yeah. But if you look at the far right as being far right outside of the center right, its stance is also anti-NATO, and it tends to be anti-Israel as well. If that's so, isn't it true that the non-mainstream far right aligns itself rather well with the non-mainstream far left in its views on NATO and Israel? That's an interesting a concept, but if one looks at, say, let's say in the United States, you would have, let's say, what you would call the far right. Again, I don't like these terms, because they're very pejorative, but not very helpful analytically. But let's use the far right. So let's say the libertarians are like Ron Paul, Daniel McAdams. They would be definitely anti-NATO, anti-foreign entanglements, and definitely anti-Israel or anti-US unconditional support for Israel. So that, I think that's true, and I think there is absolutely common ground between, say, the Ron Paul type libertarians and, let's say, antiwar.com, and the sort of figures that one would call on the left, such as the gray zone, like that. But that, but if one looks at the what would you again, if you look in Europe, the far right, what's dubbed the far right, they tend to be, very pro-Israeli. I mean, if one thinks of Nigel Farage, the National Rally, Giorgia Meloni, Viktor Orban, Geert Wilders, they're all very, very much in bed with Israel. The only kind of far right political party that isn't in bed with Israel, I think, is the Alternative for Deutschland. Of the main parties, I mean, there may be some smaller parties I'm not aware of, but of the main parties, only they are actually critical of Israel. But the rest tend to be very pro-Israel. And even when it comes to the issue of NATO, you don't see too much opposition from any of these so-called far-right figures that I've labeled. I mean, you got Nigel Farage, let's say. He has rightly criticized NATO expansion, NATO involvement, and EU involvement in the coup in Ukraine, the overthrow of Yanukovych, what that led to, the crisis that it led to with Russia. However, he's still gung-ho with NATO. He hasn't said that I think it's time to withdraw from NATO. On the contrary, he was reassuring the media, the British media, he was reassuring the British people, well, that he's talked to Trump, and Trump is absolutely solid with NATO. He has no intention of withdrawing from NATO. He, strongly supports NATO. So now, he was reassuring the public, don't worry about anything. Trump's with us. He wants NATO. So Farage hasn't really offered any kind of a serious criticism of NATO in the sense that, in the way that, let's say, George Galloway has, which is, as long as NATO continues to exist, NATO will continue to expand. And the more it continues to expand, the more it's going to get into confrontations with other powers. That's the nature of the beast. So if we're going to continue in NATO, then the dangers of war just continue to grow. Even if we avoid a war in Ukraine, we're not going to be so lucky next time. Maybe in Georgia, or Moldova, or somewhere else, there will be a war. And that's it. If you want NATO, then get ready for war. But that's not the view of these parties of the so-called far right. People like Giorgia Meloni, again, big one for NATO. Now, Marine Le Pen is an interesting case because Marine Le Pen could have tapped into a kind of a French independence streak, the sort of French gaullism, its hostility towards NATO, and she could have revived the spirit of de Gaulle, and said, yeah, well, de Gaulle withdrew from the NATO's integrated military command. He asked NATO to pack its bags and leave France, and they did. NATO headquarters left France and went to Brussels, where they set up their headquarters. And that was the prevailing view. No one went against de Gaulle, even long after de Gaulle had left the scene. It wasn't until Jacques Chirac, I think he came in 2005. No, Chirac came in 1995. He became president in 1995, and I think around about 1998, Chirac restored France to the integrated NATO military command. So that was all for since the 1960s, for more than 30 years, France had been apart from NATO. It was formally a NATO member, but it wasn't part of the integrated military command. And unlike the UK, had its own independent nuclear deterrent. It was genuinely independent. Only a French president had the power to use it. Unlike the UK, where the UK cannot use its own nuclear deterrent without American approvals. It's actually tied to the Americans. So the French actually do have an independent deterrent, not the British. So she could have done that. She could have gone and said, "Yep, I want to go back to the pre-Chirac era of France being apart from NATO." And for a while she did say that, but now she's kind of waffled on that. And I think it's not at all clear to me that France has any intention of withdrawing from France under the National Rally has any intention of withdrawing from NATO's integrated military command. So that's her. And again, pro-Israel, and somehow this is a feature of the of the far right in Europe. They tend to be very critical of Islamism, which is fair enough. But it goes together with an extreme passion for Israel, for this love for Israel, and again, Viktor Orban is a very good example of that. That somehow, absolutely unremitting, unconditional support for Israel, going together with hostility towards Islam. So, it's hard to find too many figures, again, if what you call the far right, who are indeed anti-Ukraine, anti-NATO, and anti-Israel. I mean, again, there are odd intellectuals here and there, but not as a serious political force. And again, Farage is a very good example of very pro-Israel. Again, very critical of Islam, the Muslim gangs, and so on. Introduction of Sharia law and all of those aspects of it. But very pro-Israel, and they kind of regard Israel as the sort of the paradigm of the nation state. So many of these figures, like Orban and the rest of them, who extol the virtues of the nation state as opposed to globalism, the EU, and these various international forums. Israel, however, is the model of the nation state. That's what we should aspire to. Like Israel, pursues its goals independently. It doesn't get told what to do. Israel, of course, is very assiduous about promoting this idea of its country being, we're completely independent. No one tells us what to do. Well, yeah, but you're completely dependent on the United States. I mean, yeah, United States doesn't tell you what to do. You tell the United States what to do. But Israel would not have been able to survive and not able to do whatever it does without the support of the United States. But nonetheless, that's how Israel has won the support of the far right by saying, yeah, nation state. You like nation states. We like nation states. We're the example of the nation state. We'd like you to be a little more independent and be like a true nation state. I think Israel has got itself very, very much tangled together with the European far right, and again with the American far right. And I don't just mean the sort of the evangelicals, who I don't think are that significant, but even somebody like Trump, who I think has got his eye on who are the people with money, who are the people who wield power and influence in the United States. That's what matters to Trump. And so Trump is, again, wholeheartedly with Israel, which he wasn't in 2015, 2016, until he realized how much he needed money, and therefore he very sharply made a turn and decided to become Israel's best friend. And again, he's now, his only criticism of Israel is that it's not getting the job done fast enough, and therefore is allowing its image to be tarnished in the world. If only it had got the job done faster. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Stone River says there would appear to be wiggle room in the DNC rules governing how pledged delegates must vote. Delegates elected to the National Convention pledged to a presidential candidate shall in all good conscience reflect the sentiments of those who elected them. Well, I mean, I think that it depends on state by state. I think in some states, they could, in theory, abandon the candidate to whom they are pledged, but in other states they can't. I mean, it's legally binding. Either way, any attempt for delegates to abandon Biden and get, if they had been voted in by the electors, then it'll only end up in lawsuits. I mean, they're just going to be, the moment they decided that they're not going to be pledged to Biden, it will result in lawsuits. Now, there's 4 months to go till the election. I don't know that that the Democrats really want to spend their time between now and November fighting over lawsuits in courts throughout the country. So that's why I just don't think that it can be done. I don't think that the idea that you can just bundle Biden aside. He's the president. He controls the party. It's his party. The whole apparatus of the party is his, and so any attempt to push him aside, and he resists, would just lead to a complete disaster. So I don't see it. Now, will he step aside? That's a possibility. I mean, I know he's saying today, no way, I'm staying on, I intend to fight and win and so on. That doesn't mean anything very much. But it's possible that he will think better of it if. But you always have to think about it. Look, Biden is a proud man. This will be very humiliating for him to just say, yeah, I am physically and mentally incompetent. I said that I wasn't. I said that I could do the job. But now it's clear that I can't do the job. I'm mentally incompetent, and therefore I'm stepping down. I mean, it really is absolutely humiliating. Because apart from anything else, it will, as I've said before, it will lead to a demand that he resign immediately. He's not going to be able to fight that off. There will be, the moment he says, because of my physical and mental incompetence, I will not run for re-election, which I've only just realized now, having said repeatedly that I am running. There will be moves very quickly within Congress that Article 25 be invoked. Now, it's not up to Congress to do it, but the Congress will start putting the pressure on the vice president, on the cabinet, to invoke Article 25 and say that he is not suitable to be commander-in-chief. We can't have this person who is barely conscious having his finger on the trigger. I mean, it's just too dangerous. If you saw a picture on the cover of the Economist magazine with a kind of a walker and the presidential shield on top of the walker, and the cover says, "No way to run a country." So that's The Economist, the sort of the globalist Economist, which has been a big fan of Biden's, and a very unenthusiastic about Trump, was just mocking him, a walker, with a presidential shield. So saying no way to run a country. So as I say, I think the pressure will grow on him to step aside, and he may step aside, but I think he's going to fight it out, because I think he can't really take the humiliation, and he won't be able to resist being pushed out of the Oval Office. I mean, because he say, "Hey, look, you're not fit to be commander in chief," and besides, it'll be much better for Harris to be the president. I mean, that'll give her a huge advantage for the election in November, that she will be President Harris, and therefore the official incumbent, and not just someone who's just been pushed into the into the number one slot because Biden has stepped aside. So, but I don't think Biden's going to want that, and I don't think Jill Biden is going to want that. So I think it's going to be quite difficult to pull that off. It could happen. I mean, it's a fast-moving situation. I still don't think it will, but I'm not ruling it out, definitely. Anyway, Cynthia, thank you very much, Cynthia. Really appreciate it. Cynthia says, anyway, why does NATO and all of its military misadventures never become much of a political issue during the voting season in the US and in Europe? Yeah, very good question. I wish I knew. Yeah, but yes. Is it because these voters believe such things are only handled by a secret government, making it pointless for them to make them into a political issue? Okay. Or do they honestly believe that whatever NATO does, good or bad, has no effect at all on their own life, be it their sense of security or even their standard of living? Yeah, those are excellent questions, and I would imagine the answer is a combination of all of them, because NATO is just there as this benign force, the supposedly benign force, beyond any real question. It was founded in 1949, supposedly to defend us against big bad Stalin and his Asiatic hordes that he was supposedly ready to unleash against Europe. And for years and years, no one really questioned it. I mean, originally there were some people who questioned it, the efficacy of this, mostly in the United States. Oddly enough, on the right. So some, the figures like Robert Taft, who had been he had tried to win the GOP nomination twice, failed to Thomas Dewey. Completely useless person. But Robert Taft, who was was an old school Republican, he was not an enthusiast. He was then Senate Majority Leader at the time of the ratification of the Brussels Treaty. He was not at all enthusiastic, so he was against it. And then you had figures like Walter Lippmann, again, major American intellectual journalist, publicist. He was also very skeptical about NATO. George Kennan, skeptical about NATO. So oddly enough, these are all figures on the right in America who didn't think that this was such a great idea for America to sign on to these open-ended commitments to innumerable countries. Not to mention that it's only going to make the Soviet Union afraid of for its own security. It's not just going to sit and accept this militarized European continent. But in Europe, it was more on the left. So the right, all of them accepted NATO. There's very little criticism on the right of NATO, but the left was not at all well disposed towards it, and that included like the French communist parties, the Italian communist parties. Britain's Labour, however, was very Atlanticist. So, right from the beginning, from 1945 on, it was a very Atlanticist Labour. Ernie Bevin was the foreign secretary, very, very anti-communist. Now later on, it changed as the left gradually grew in power within the Labour Party, and then it did become very critical of NATO. But in general, the overall consensus in Europe was that NATO was pretty good. It provides us with security, and basically we're getting the Americans to defend us, and we don't have to do anything. I mean, we don't have to spend too much on our military because the Americans are going to do it for us. And so long as NATO didn't do anything harmful, so long as it said, "Oh, we're purely defensive. We're defensive. We're not going to get involved in anything outside of our NATO area. It's only within our NATO area. If anyone attacks NATO, then then we'll all go into something or other. We'll all one for all and all for one. We'll defend one another." But that means we have to stay within this area. We never, NATO doesn't do anything outside of this area. So as long as it wasn't really doing any harm, and as long as basically the Americans were picking up the tab, no one really criticized NATO. And then this went on throughout the Cold War, because again, why criticize it? What's it doing that's harmful? I mean, there were issues involving nuclear weapons and American stationing of nuclear weapons that came up in the 1980s, but that wasn't specifically about NATO. It was more about the Americans and the whole issue of the nuclear umbrella, which in effect was making Europe insecure, because as long as you have American nuclear weapons based in Europe, in the UK, in Germany, and so on, then Europe becomes a target. And so the Europeans did get a little nervous, again, not so much about NATO, but just because of the nuclear weapons, and that made them a target, a potential target for the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union would then feel threatened by having American nuclear missiles really just within 7 minutes of Moscow. And so, that created that hair trigger, which could lead to a nuclear conflict. So that kind of led to intense feelings. But as I say, it wasn't specifically directed at NATO. It was more directed at the nuclear weapons, and that the Americans maybe were planning to fight a nuclear war with the Soviet Union on the European continent while keeping the United States safe. So they would fight, with these tactical nuclear weapons, intermediate nuclear weapons, limited to the European continents, but it would never actually reach the level of strategic nuclear weapons, and that led to a great deal of anguish and protests in Europe. So in the 80s, it did become a matter of controversy. Again, not it was more the nuclear weapons issue. But the question then arose is like when the Cold War came to an end, late 80s, early 90s. That's when people raised the issue. Well, now that it's over, why is NATO continuing? Why are we still going on with NATO? I mean, the Warsaw Pact has dissolved. The Soviet Union itself is no more. So we can't keep saying that the Red Army will be unleashed against Europe. So why do we need NATO? And then the NATO apparat went into action, trying to invent all sorts of justifications for its continued existence. So, first justification was the humanitarian intervention. We're we're angels of mercy. We're going to save damsels in distress. We're going to try and save innocent women and children who are being marauded and killed and raped by horrible, evil people like the Serbs. So that was the first justification for NATO's continued existence. Of course, they got a big boost from the bombing of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1995, and then, of course, the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. And then, because they came out, despite the fact that people were a little concerned, well, how the Russians going to feel about this? This is the Serbs. Don't the Russians have a special bond with the Serbs? And but it worked out. Nothing terrible happened. Russia was too weak to do anything about the bombing of the Serbs, and so all the NATO big shots, they all slapped one another's backs, congratulated one another. Hey, another big triumph for NATO. And then, of course, we had the global war on terror, and again, big NATO role for there. But at no point was NATO endangering the security of the people inside the member states. So they said, okay, fine. I mean, NATO didn't have to do much against Yugoslavia. I mean, how much effort do you have to make to pulverize, a country of 9 million? And same with the global war on terror. I mean, basically, it was the Americans. NATO just had a bit part of it. But all along, it was clear that NATO was pursuing a disastrous policy, which was the expansion. Because then they went on, and people didn't really pay much attention to it, because although the Russians were saying we're very unhappy about this, we want you to stop doing this, and this started under Yeltsin. But essentially, Russia was seen to be far too weak to be able to do anything about it, and it's true. I mean, Russia was very weak, and Russia was unable to do anything about it, and as country after country was scooped up. All of the members of the Warsaw Pact scooped up into NATO. And then we had the 3 Baltic states. In other words, those were 3 republics of the former USSR, now inside NATO. And so, hey, Russia's not able to do anything about it. And then, of course, you had the 2008 and the promise that Ukraine and Georgia would be NATO. But again, when they did that, again, people thought, well, Russia is too weak to do anything about it. And, even Viktor Orban says, I mean, he always repeats, if we had done it in 2008, if we had invited Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO in 2008, we could have got away with it, because Russia then was very weak. Russia then was far too weak to be able to stop us. We didn't do it. And because we delayed, then that allowed Russia to go strong. That's what I mean. Orban is nothing if not an unprincipled pragmatist. Yeah, we should have done it in 2008. We didn't do it then, but now it's too late. So now, to go back to your question, why don't people raise an issue? Well, how politics works, which is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if you ask them, why don't you think? You say, well, NATO's not doing any harm. It's like it's there. I mean, basically, it's the Americans are doing it. We can go on enjoying our comfortable lives, a welfare state. The Americans take care of everything, and nothing terrible is going to happen to us as a result of NATO. Now maybe gradually people will begin to grasp that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to go on expanding despite the warnings of Russia. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to push for Ukraine membership of NATO. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to go on on these kind of bombing sprees against Libya and the rest, particularly if you continue to insist that you're a defensive alliance. I mean, what's defensive about anything that you've been doing for the past 3 decades? So when you say that, or do they honestly believe that whatever NATO does, good or bad, has no effect at all on their own life, be in the sense of security or even their standard of living? I think that's probably true. I think that has been the assumption. But maybe it will change. I mean, it's it's going to take a long time if it does change, because we now have, within a few hours in the UK, we're going to have the Keir Starmer government. Starmer is as much a gung-ho NATO enthusiast as the Tories have been. So I don't think much, will change there. Well, we'll see what happens in France. My feeling is that nothing much will change in France. I don't believe that the National Rally will be able to form a government. I don't think they'll be able to get that absolute majority in the National Assembly, that, even with the alliance with the Gaullists, that they won't have that absolute majority. And that means there'll be a kind of a mediocre centrist government, running things on an ad hoc basis. And so NATO just continues. The way even that they look upon Ukraine, they still don't think that it has done, the citizens of Europe still haven't quite figured out how dangerous their situation is. They say, yeah, sure, Putin says this and Putin says that, but, he's basically a paper tiger. He's just blustering. He's not really going to do anything. He's not, he's just letting us. Basically, we've continued to supply arms and the rest to Ukraine, and Russia hasn't done anything. Russia hasn't extended the war outside of Ukraine. Russia doesn't want to do that. Russia doesn't want to fight a war with NATO. Even the New York Times admitted this the other day. U.S. military experts are now convinced that Russia does not want to extend the war beyond Ukraine's borders. Now, that may seem obvious to us, but that's contrary to what Biden and has been saying, and even Macron, which is that Putin wants to go all out. Once he's conquered Ukraine, then Poland, then the Baltic states, and so on. That Putin is trying to realize some megalomaniacal vision of his. So we have to stop him in Ukraine, otherwise he's going to gobble up Europe. But basically, the New York Times says, no one really believes that. The U.S. generals don't believe that Russia wants to extend the war beyond the borders of Ukraine. And so, the people within NATO countries say, well, okay, we keep pumping all this arms into Ukraine, but it's a problem for Ukraine, it's a problem for Russia. We're still okay. And so, why make this into a big issue? Now, if things got out of control, and if the war did extend beyond Ukraine's borders, then I think things would change. But unfortunately, the public only really gets interested in something, and when you whack it over the head, and you say, okay, you see where we're going, and then you say, yeah, that's but at the moment, it's saying, hey, well, it's okay. Nothing terrible has happened. The Americans, they're doing what they're doing. They're spending their money. I mean, it's a dumb way of looking at it, because it's still European taxpayer money that's being squandered in Ukraine at a time when there's no money for things in Europe. You know, at the time of hardships and lack of public services in Europe, apparently there's money for Ukraine, but nothing disastrous has yet happened. So, unfortunately, NATO isn't an issue as yet. But let's hope it changes. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Stone River says, if the party leadership, etc., has come out en masse calling on Biden to step aside, the good conscience of pledged delegates may lead them to vote for another consensus candidate. I don't know that that's the case. I don't know that. I mean, even if what is the party leadership? Who is the party leadership? I mean, you'd say that Obama, I guess the Clintons, Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. I'm not at all sure that would be sufficient. I mean, it's still a matter. I mean, you're right. I mean, to pick up what does good conscience mean? You'd have to, I mean, I guess it would have to be litigated. But I do think that it's a serious matter of legal obligations. I just think it'd be very very difficult. Now, I do think though, if all those party leaders that I just mentioned, if they all came out and said Biden needs to step aside, I think Biden would step aside. The point is that at the moment, no Democrat of any real significance has said he needs to step aside. I mean, I know there have been some, but no one of any national prominence. But I do think that if all of those people, if the Obamas and the Clintons and Pelosi and Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries all came out and said Biden needs to step down, I can't see Biden continuing under those circumstances. I mean, he just can't lead a party into an election when the party leaders have essentially disowned him. So I think it's not so much the issue of the delegates, but I think Biden would just simply say, "Look, I've lost the party. I have to. I can't lead the party." However, you can also say that they haven't said it. I mean, that they have not done that. They have not. They've all pretty much supported Biden, and none of them has so much as hinted that they think Biden is bad and that Biden is going to lead the party to disaster or anything like that. So, but I mean, I guess it could still happen. I mean, if the convention goes badly in August, then maybe they will change. Maybe then if Obama will come out and say, I think it would only need, say, Obama to do it, given his stature within the party. The Joe needs to go. I think then Biden would probably go, but at the moment we're still quite away from that. But I just think that the issue of the issue of the delegates would still be a legal matter, and that would be just far too difficult that they would just simply abandon. I think much more likely is if the party leaders, put up a united front, they all come out and say Joe must go, and then I think Joe would go. I really can't see him resisting that. Anyway. Stone River, thank you so much. Happy 4th of July. Sausages and Frankfurters on offer here. Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I like, it kind of makes me feel nostalgic for the for the hot dogs. I was never a huge hot dog fan, but it's just it is part of American life, and it's kind of fun occasionally to do that. And I have to say, good hot dogs are really good. I mean, that's as long as you don't think about what you're actually eating, you think, okay, it tastes okay. Um, but like you have to, I have the same feeling here in Hungary, where they have this Hungarian salami, and then they of course have these Hungarian sausages called gyulai and choboi. Now, I think they're extremely tasty. However, there's really nothing nourishing about them. I mean, it's just all paprika and fat. I mean, there's just nothing there. It's paprika and fat. I mean, maybe there's some meat there or something. I have no idea what the meat is. It tastes very good, and I've liked it ever since I was a child. But you also know as you're eating it that God, I'm filling myself up with absolute junk. I mean, I'm better off eating potato chips than these Hungarian sausages. And Robert says, you should CC Buddy and Apple. They look like a couple of serious diners. Yeah, I mean, I tell you, I mean, those dogs, and sometimes I've seen that, and, Peter feeds them sausages. They finish those sausages off very quickly. I mean, they could, they have those competitions, the July the 4th competitions as to who can eat the most hot dogs. I think Buddy and Apple probably could take part in that competition. How many hot dogs can they put away in the the shortest amount of time? I think they would give those champions hot dog eaters a run for their money. Anne Marie, thank you so much. Good evening, George and everyone. So thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you for your generosity. And Summer Petrus, good evening, George. So Summer Petrus, you see how dark it is. You haven't been able to stop the impending darkness. I mean, it's a little hard to ask of anyone to do that, but you see, definitely getting dark. R. Brown, 1958 says Trump does say that he'll end it by bringing everyone to the table. He has a record for starting no new wars. It's also a giant grift which will hamstring his domestic economic agenda. I mean, I think that's how he sees it. But it's an interesting issue whether he will have the strength of character and the strength of purpose to do that. Because, if you look at that guy who was his national security advisor, that Robert O'Brien, he's just written an article in Foreign Affairs, the in-house journal of the America's foreign policy elite, saying, no, basically saying we'll continue with everything that Biden's been doing and more. We'll send them even more lethal weapons. Now, I have no idea whether O'Brien will have any role in a Trump administration, but there will be people like O'Brien who will be telling him, we can't afford, Putin to win. We have to stop Putin, and as long as he has clowns like Sebastian Gorka around him, and remember, Lindsey Graham is still part of his inner circle. So they will have an influence on him. Now, that may not be important, and maybe Trump will be single-minded and ruthless and determined, and indeed press forward for some kind of a peace conference. If he does that, that could make a difference. But then it's an interesting. If he does push forward with a peace conference, well, what about Israel? I mean, is he going to try and press for a peace conference with Israel? Because his line is no peace conference. Israel needs to just finish the job, get the job done. So it's going to be interesting if how he's going to keep those two things separate. So in one case, we need a peace conference to bring this thing to an end. And in other cases, it says, no, the last thing we want is a peace conference. We should just allow Israel to finish off Hamas. I mean, he can do it, but it's going to be quite difficult for him. So, Trump at the moment, he has many different voices around him, and we don't know which way he's going to go. As I say, during his first term, what characterized Trump is a lack of ruthlessness. He didn't have any kind of decisive vision of or at least any decisiveness in realizing his goals. It's like he walked away from the JCPOA. Well, what did that achieve? It didn't really achieve anything. And it's true that he didn't start any new wars. However, it wasn't for want of trying. I mean, he did have Soleimani assassinated. Who knows how that could have gone? That could have been quite awkward. But he didn't end the wars that he could have ended. That's the thing. He could have ended the Syria war. He could have ended the Afghanistan war. So that's why I think that again, that's his first term. That doesn't mean that we now know what he's going to do in the second term. But you'd have to say it's a mixed record of what he did in the first term. Again, he promised to improve relations with Russia. Relations deteriorated drastically. So, I mean, he has to realize what went wrong and what needs to go right. Otherwise, he's going to have a real problem on his hands, because I think that if he doesn't end that war in Ukraine, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him. And it's going to overshadow entirely his administration. Anyway, Mary Grossman says 4th of July fireworks are rained out in the Midwest. Oh, that's pretty. In the Twin Cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, also under the flood alert by the Mississippi River. Huh. Sorry about that. Yeah, but I don't know. I kind of admire anyone who lives up there in Minnesota. I don't know. It's just I don't know. The cold weather just always gets me. I don't know. The very thought of it always just gets me very depressed. And but I admire people who can live there and tolerate that brutal cold weather. But I'm sorry that the fireworks have been rained out. Cynthia says, I'm not crazy about On the Waterfront, but it's certainly better than Blue Collar. Okay. Not to sound like a prude, because I'm not, but some of the scenes in this film are a bit too raunchy for me to watch, and some of the foul language in it is a bit of a turn-off for me as well. In fact, the number of cuss words in it clocks in at 223, which is quite a lot for 1978. All right. Well, that's a fair criticism. There wasn't really any need for that. I mean, I don't remember that the foul language, but it doesn't surprise me because it features Richard Pryor, and Richard Pryor, his whole shtick was his language, his foul language. I mean, that was his his comedy shtick. So that was that wouldn't surprise me. Blue Collar could have been much better, and again, it's very anti-union. Again, the unions were the bad guys in the film. The odd thing about it is my recollection. It's already some years ago since I saw it. Is that the film seemed to start off as one kind of movie, and then it developed into another kind of movie. And so it started off as being a kind of goofy comedy, a Richard Pryor type comedy, and then it became this kind of really dark movie about unions. but you're not crazy about On the Waterfront. By the way, Cynthia, I mean, you probably know, but which I didn't know, that apparently Eve Marie Saint, who was in On the Waterfront, is still alive, and she's 100 years old today, which is very impressive. I didn't I didn't know she was still alive, and obviously I didn't know that she was 100. So good for her. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's good point about both of those films. But we put other films on the ballot. I'd have been happier if one of the other films had won out, but they didn't. So it's really a tussle between On the Waterfront and Blue Collar. Anyway, uh, Cynthia says, by the way, one of the three top films with the most cuss words in it were made by Martin Scorsese: The Wolf of Wall Street and Casino, 715 and 616 respectively. Yes, I'm not. I'm very unkeen on both of those films. I thought neither of them was a particularly good film. Both were vastly too long. Both were extraordinarily repetitious. It's the same scene being repeated again and again and again. We got the point. We already know that the Joe Pesci character is psychotic, and we know that the Sharon Stone character is a tramp and is thoroughly contemptuous of her husband, who played by Robert De Niro, and is always going to cheat on her husband. We got the point. I mean, how many times are we going to play the same scene? So I don't know why both of those films were absurdly long. And the same with The Wolf of Wall Street. We got the point. He's a crook. He's stealing from his clients, and the FBI are onto him. But it just takes forever. You kind of wait. Okay, well, when are they going to finally make their arrest and send him to prison already? So I didn't think either of them was particularly good. To be honest, with the case of Scorsese, I thought he peaked with Goodfellas, which he made in 1991, and I haven't liked anything he's done since 1991. He made a remake very soon after Goodfellas of Cape Fear, and I think the remake was nowhere near as good as the original. Despite the star power and all the flashiness and all the energy that Scorsese always brings to his movies, still the original was with Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum was better. Anyway, then Cynthia goes on, which is indicative of him having a poor scriptwriter. Yeah. I mean, maybe so. They're just not great films, and then definitely not great scripts. Again, unlike Goodfellas, which I think was a very good script, it was a very funny script. But yeah, you're right. A good scriptwriter doesn't have to stoop to using any kind of foul language. For instance, in I'm All Right, Jack, the stuttering man says, they fight us on every issue, which is a much more creative way of saying the F word without actually saying it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. He does that several times with the because and then you're waiting for what he's going to say, and like and the one there's also like that in when the two crooks are sitting in a car, and one of the crooks is an Arab, please, in the cliched way the British have this Arab, and they're both kind of they're both celebrating how they've basically stolen a lot of money, and then the Arab says, well, what I always say, I'm paraphrasing from memory. What I always say, a bird in the hand is worth two hands in the bush. And then the other, the other guy sort of looks at him and sort of, I don't know what the hell he's saying, but it probably doesn't sound good. But it's just, but that's part of what I was saying the other day, the British smutty humor, which again I always thought was very funny. But I think it kind of went out in the I guess in the 60s and 70s precisely because everything became much more explicit, and so there wasn't that there wasn't any longer the need for the smutty thing became surplus because you didn't have to suggest anything because everything was already out in the open. Everyone was already explicit. So there wasn't the humor of somebody apparently saying something outrageous because you're free to say anything outrageous, just like you said, they fight us on everything. So that's a kind of sad thing that smuttiness disappeared. Yeah. Okay. So then Cynthia says, replying to William Taylor, I think because there's no obvious immediate downside to starting multiple wars far, far away, the tremendous debt will cause huge problems after most politicians are gone. I agree. Also because the legacy media sucks. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, you put that very well. Lenz Larke says, no way will a woke political party swap Harris for a white male. Zero chance. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I think that if Biden is not the nominee, it will be Harris. There's just no one else. There is no way the Democratic Party is going to push aside Harris. So that's it. Those are the only options. You either have Biden leading the party into the election, or you have Harris. But there's no magic figure of Gavin Newsom or even the Gretchen Whitmer, whom nobody has ever heard of. That's why it's such a ridiculous idea about when we bring in Gretchen Whitmer. Nobody knows who the hell she is. You've got a few months before the election, and just I mean, nobody really knows even who Gavin Newsom is. I mean, they know him in California, but no one outside California knows who he is. So it cannot be done. And then Danaki says, has anyone seen in the last year any of those 300,000 soldiers that Russia supposedly has in action in Ukraine? Do they even exist? Will Odessa, Kharkov, Kiev, Lvov fall in the next 5 minutes, or what? Do the Russians still inflict 14 casualties on the Ukrainians for every one of theirs, as Zionists have been claiming for the last 18 months? Yeah, I mean, I kind of, I've said this many times before. I mean, we're always getting very excited about, Russia captures this village and that village, and they say, oh, they've captured this village. And they say, well, total population of this village was 10,000 before the start of the war. Now the population is about 700. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like a very significant achievement. And then they say, yeah, but that leads us to something else, and that will give us a strategic location, and we'll be able to take the strategic location, and that will ensure that Donetsk city will no longer come under fire. But I don't understand. I've never understood the logic of that, because if you've got missiles of considerable range, which Russia and Ukraine has that, they have the the HIMARS, not to mention the ATACMS, they can still launch them against Donetsk city. I mean, so I don't know why you say, well, if you take this, this village, this height, now we'll be able to control the territory, and the Donetsk city will not come under attack. I don't see why that happens. But that's with the sort of logic why we're always getting excited about the latest village that has been captured by the Russians. But we've got the NATO summit next week, and of course that's where they're going to have Zelensky, and they're going to have to thread the needle, go beyond what they promised in Vilnius last year, but fall short of actual invitation to NATO membership. So it's going to be a very tricky operation. I mean, we know some of the outlines of what they're going to offer Ukraine. I mean, I think they're going to set up some kind of a NATO civilian official who's in Ukraine, and then there's going to be some kind of a NATO Ukraine operations center in Germany, and so that's you kind of bringing Ukraine into NATO, but not entirely. So on top of all the various bilateral security guarantees. So you kind of say, yeah, I mean, we've come a long way to getting you into NATO, but it's not, you're not formally in NATO, and therefore Stoltenberg can still say NATO is not a party to the conflict. But the new formula, and which has been enunciated by Lloyd Austin, is we're building a bridge to NATO. Ukraine, there's a bridge. Ukraine is walking across this bridge. But it's a real problem, because again, for Russia, the more Ukraine gets entangled within all the within NATO, the more unrealistic is Russia's objective of no Ukraine membership for NATO. I mean, unless you're going to say, if Ukraine is not, just because Ukraine is not formally a member of NATO, that doesn't mean Russia has accomplished what it wanted, because in all but name, Ukraine is a member of NATO. I mean, they've got this NATO civilian office inside Ukraine, and you've got this NATO training equipment center in Germany, and then you've got all these bilateral agreements. It's still a long way from what Russia needed, which was no NATO in Ukraine, and definitely no NATO military hardware and missiles in Ukraine. Anyway, Lenz Lark says there's a meeting on Monday with Biden to discuss his participation. Yeah. Danaki says Choboi sausages are great. Yeah, they are. They are great. They like Julai sausages, but they're hotter. So if you like your greasy sausages to be really hot, so if it burns your mouth, then the Choboi sausages are preferable to Julai. But I mean, they taste good, but it's still kind of junk. But that's the way it is. And the Stone River says, in replying to Robert, you should CC Buddy and Apple. They're a couple of Sears diners. They look like a couple of Sears diners, yes. And then Stone River says, I'll have to set a bigger table and have more napkins at hand. Yeah, I think they kind of eat you under the table. I mean, if you look at Buddy in particular, I mean, he is seriously bloated. I mean, I think he's had one hot dog too many in his life. And then Danaki says pig salami is also great, very similar to a famous Romanian salami we have here. That's interesting. I don't think I've ever eaten a Romanian salami. Yeah, I mean but I don't know if the Romanian salamis are on sale here. Maybe I just don't look for them, and maybe they are available. But that's interesting. Babs Habits, good to see you. Thank you so much. Danakis, do you think NATO will actually beat Russia ultimately? Is your point that Russia simply isn't going as well as Russo piles, please, I have assessed them to be? Well, I don't think NATO can beat Russia. And I mean, I don't think it can inflict a military defeat on Russia. What they can do is essentially exhaust Russia. And I think that's really their strategy of just continuing to exhaust Russia, because it's Russia that's being exhausted rather than NATO. NATO is not losing any lives. And, you know, even economically, it hasn't really suffered any adverse consequence, nothing like the adverse consequences that were promised at the start, you know, whether it be huge, you know, starvation, you know, lights out, you know, power outages, riots in the streets, and so on. I mean, none of that has materialized. And so the problem is that if you keep losing lives at this scale, then something will break. And that's really the concern that I have. You know, again, you know, you said plead guilty to Russophiles. You know, me too. But there's going to be a point. There's going to be it will have to be a point, unless, you know, Trump brings it to an end in the near future, in which the Russian people are going to turn around and say, we're just not going to lose any more of our lives. I mean, I'm just not going to send our sons to their deaths for objectives that we don't see. We don't see that we're any closer to achieving any of the objectives that Putin set out on February the 24th, 2022. And when that happens, then that's it. You know, then the public will turn with fury at its government, and they'll demand, bring this war to an end. You know, that you haven't achieved what you said you would achieve, and we're just not going to lose our sons anymore. You know, we have our sons. You know, he's doing his homework, playing football outside, and then next year he's going to be dead. I mean, who's going to achieve that? I mean, who's going to accept that? And you're saying, well, you know, your goal of making Russia secure from NATO, that hasn't been accomplished. That just simply hasn't been accomplished, because NATO is more firmly entrenched in Ukraine than ever. So that's really my concern. You know, that this is a war. You know, like any war, you know, you have to win it as quickly as you can, because the longer it goes on, the greater the uncertainty, and the greater the likelihood that the public is just going to get fed up and say, that's, you know, we can't go on with legs. And that's NATO's calculation. That's all they're trying to do. They think that Russia doesn't know how to end this war, and they think that eventually the Russian people will get fed up, because they're going to see that they're not going to push NATO back. They're not going to be able to defeat NATO. And then they'll just simply say, you know, that's it. We can't go on with this. That's the NATO calculation. It's by no means obvious to me that calculation is wrong. So again, that's what I think that's what could happen. Because what these Xenon types that Denoki talks about were predicting is we have these massive Russian offensives, you know, huge military operations of the type that they had in World War II, which crushed the Wehrmacht. But we're not getting those. I mean, that's gone. That clearly, the Russia, for some reason, whether they're able to do it or they don't have the capacity, they're not mounting any major military offensives. They have no intention of fighting any major military offensive. They're going by this inch by inch, foot by foot style of warfare. Very heavy in terms of casualties. But at this rate, this war could go on. I mean, if you're just going to go, think there's some great achievement because you've taken a village with a population of 9,000, which is nothing. I mean, it's 9,000 nothing. It's a tiny village. Then the war could just go on. I mean, what the Ritters and everyone else have been telling us is that we're going to get these massive offensive. But where is this offensive? You need huge armies to conduct this kind of major maneuvers and major military offensives. Lenz Larke says, now I think about Harris won't step aside. Running even hopelessly is a huge cash opener. But plus she will have increased prestige even if she loses. No one cares about former VPs. Harris will not be pushed aside. Harris has the most name recognition within the Democratic Party. Now, Hillary Clinton, of course, has greater name recognition, but Harris is not going to step aside for Hillary Clinton. I mean, she might, I guess. I mean, if she's dumb, she might name Hillary Clinton as her running mate. I mean, I say dumb because her longevity would be in serious question if Hillary was her number two. But I think Harris will be the presumptive nominee, and I think there's nothing anyone can do about that. The party will absolutely support her. They wouldn't be able to come up with any plausible alternative. I mean, even if you had someone with star power and say, well, this person, look, we looked at the polls and this person will beat Trump. But they don't have anyone like that. I mean, not in the polls that they've run, Harris does better than all of the possible rivals. I mean, that obviously is because Harris has some name recognition. I mean, nobody knows who any of these other figures are, but Harris does better against Trump than Gavin Newsom. So it's hard to see how you can make the case that it shouldn't be Harris, and let's leave aside all the issue about gender and race and everything else. Anyway, so Babs Habit says Harris is the least bad option of all the bad options for the DNC. I agree. Lenz Larke asks a good question. Why is Seb a clown to neocon? Yeah, I don't get the Sebastian Gorka. I mean, I think the Sebastian Gorka thing is he at some point got in with Bannon. I don't know how. I mean, Gorka's a sort of a grifter, and he got lucky. He got in with Steve Bannon, and Bannon, he has an entree with Trump. I don't know, to be honest, what Trump really thinks of Bannon. I mean, I think he obviously thinks Bannon's a good organizer, good publicist. He does that show. He generates enthusiasm. He generates a kind of a team of zealots around him. But on the other hand, the guy's, the guy's just a sort of a hand grenade. And I don't know whether he does Trump any favors with his ranting and raving, because he tends to think that the cutest thing to do is to admit all of the things that people are accusing you of. So they say, oh, Steve Bannon said that Trump is going to go after his enemies. That's MSNBC. Oh, he's going to go after his enemies. And then Bannon say, yeah, you're right. And some of my MSMs say, oh, Steve Bannon promises to unleash the Justice Department against Trump's political opponents. And Bannon said, yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. That's, it may be funny and clever and cute, but it's a terrible look, because you're confirming what your enemies are accusing you of. You never want to do that. It's the famous problem with Barry Goldwater, when he delivered his speech at the 1964 GOP convention, when he said something like, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And I think then he said moderation. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. I can't remember the word moderation of something in the defense of whatever. Freedom is no virtue. You see, when you do that, you're accepting your opponent's characterization. And so you say, yeah, I'm an extremist, but it's in defense of liberty. All people hear is that, yeah, I'm an extremist. So when Bannon said, yeah, we're going to go after Trump's enemies, that's what people get. Yeah, that means you're going to essentially wage war, and therefore use lawfare against Trump's enemies. Now, I don't necessarily think that's such a terrible idea, but not if you're running in an election. If you want to win an election, it probably isn't a great idea to reinforce that impression. But anyway, that was Bannon, and then but Gorka got in with Bannon, and Bannon obviously likes him. He likes having people around who sound crazy. So when he says, Putin is a KGB, apparatchik, he's a thug, a murderer, and whatever. And that's the way Gorka talks. We need to, destroy Putin and the KGB. Bannon, while he's not formally pro-war, though again, I'm not entirely sure what Bannon really thinks. But he likes, the whole, Putin is KGB. Yeah, he's evil. These are the most evil people in the world. That's KGB. That's what they're about. They had the Holodomor. That's the same people. They had the Holodomor. They starved Ukrainians. So he buys into the whole mythology of the Soviet Union, the Great Terror, and and so on. So the point is that once you do that, once you accept that characterization of Russia as evil, because you have Putin, who apparently is the progeny of Stalin and Beria, then it's just one step to go beyond that. Well, we can't allow him to win. We can't do a deal with this person. And while Bannon may think that, but we can still do deals or whatever, you're not going to do it. Once you tell people that this is evil, then it's going to be very hard to sit down and say, well, okay, well, let's sign an agreement. Can be done, but I don't think it. I think that's not the way to go. But that's Bannon, and I think Bannon just likes having that Sebastian Gorka spouting this warmed over Cold War hysteria. Lenz, like I says, Harris looks easy to control too. She's a drunk and not very bright. I agree. And then Steve K9, good to see you, Steve, says Trump has a strong character. How else could he put up with the hell he has been through? Yep, I agree. His problem is simplistic thinking. Yep. Could use J.D. Vance to provide some thinking. Well, I would like to see J.D. Vance in that position. I think he'd be absolutely the perfect choice for Trump. I'm just not sure that's what he's going to do. I have this feeling that he's going to play the conventional race, gender, jelly bean card, which is, well, let's have Tim Scott. Maybe he will appeal to the blacks, or that maybe he'll go for maybe even something like Marco Rubio. I don't think it'll be Rubio, but I have this feeling that he might just do that rather conventional thing, just like he did in 2016 when he selected the worst possible person, which was Mike Pence. You could see what the calculation was, why they picked Pence, but Pence was a terrible choice, and it was obvious at the time that he was going to be a terrible choice and was going to direct his administration in a awful direction. And Pence, one of his first acts as VP was to destroy Mike Flynn. And Trump never really recovered from the loss of Mike Flynn. And that was Pence. He had a job to do, and he went ahead and destroyed Mike Flynn. So, you're right. He does have a remarkable character, amazing resilience, but surprisingly, he kind of thinks very conventionally when it comes to politics. He doesn't allow his more daring ideas to come forward. So that's why he, in 2020, and even now, he starts playing this card of, I'm really a much better friend of the blacks than Biden is, because Biden supported the crime bill of 1995, and Trump, am releasing those the blacks from prison. These were the people you incarcerated. So he's trying to go to the left of Biden and say, hey, the blacks support me because I'm releasing them from prison, whereas you incarcerated them. Well, that was the worst possible argument you could make. It's a bad argument all round if you're trying to be the kind of the Republican, the law and order, tough on crime kind of Republican, which Trump was doing. But it was also a disastrous way of thinking. In 2020, that was the summer of George Floyd. That was, the cities were burning again with Democratic collusion. The Democrats deliberately wanted to do that to weaken Trump. But then Trump is saying, yeah, but I'm releasing all these people from prison. And then he had his daughter at the GOP convention in 2020 saying, and we've only just started. In other words, she's promising that in the second Trump term, they're going to release a hell of a lot more people from prison. Now, he was thinking in a very conventional way, well, this is the way I appeal to blacks. And that's what, it's kind of the way, the New York Times might think, oh, this is the way you need to appeal to blacks. Well, of course, that's not the way to appeal to blacks. Just as picking Tim Scott is not the way to appeal to blacks, but blacks don't particularly like Tim Scott. He doesn't have any rapport with them. He only has a rapport with the GOP, which is always looking for black candidates, to present, to show how non-racist they really are. Look, we're not racist. Look, we have a black senator. So it's only the GOP bigwigs who like Tim Scott. But that's why I don't know. I have sort of fears that Trump might do the conventional thing. But as I say the other day, I think he will pick Elise Stefanik. And there are reasonable arguments to be made for picking Stefanik. I wouldn't pick her, but I can see why he might do that. I'd like J.D. Vance. I'd like Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard obviously isn't in the running, but Vance would be good. Babs Habit says, I think they got Trump's mind right by threatening to take his properties and bankrupt him. Yeah, okay. That was that was a quite nasty. A lot, there's a lot of nasty things. He still has to deal with that issue. There's a lot of money involved there. And then Rob Brown says, I'll play devil's advocate. Trump knows now that the entire deep state apparatus has been trying to take him out since 2015. Yep. Some part of his current run is to take out the deep state. Why would he run now if he didn't plan on something like this? His circle of allies is now crystal clear, as are his enemies. Well, I don't disagree with any of that. I think that's a reasonable inference. You can make that inference if and think, well, Trump is now thinking in a very different way. The problem is that in none of his speeches has he given any indication of that. I mean, that's why we look at these comments on Ukraine, because that's the biggest crisis that he would be facing on January the 20th. And so we want to see what give any clues as to what he might do, and he doesn't. And unfortunately, he tends to say stuff like, "I really like Zelensky. I got on very well with him, and he didn't go against me at the time of the impeachment." You know, everything is always a kind of personal thing. The Democrats will impeach me over that perfect phone call. He never cooperated with the Democrats. And I was the first person to start sending lethal aid to Ukraine. Obama was just sending pillowcases and, whatever. So that, doesn't mean very much. However, it could mean, I mean, the question then is, you're right about that, the deep state. But, what if Trump is thinking that I don't want to go down in history as the president who lost to Ukraine? Now, I mean, that's a dumb way of thinking, of course. And no one here, I think, thinks along those lines. But he may think like that. It's like the presidents, whether it's JFK or Johnson or Eisenhower, or anyone who was thinking, well, I don't want to go down in history as the man who lost Vietnam. Because, you're thinking about Trump and Trump's ego. And while, we tend to think in this rational, realpolitik way and saying, look, what's in America's national interest, what's in Europe's national interest, and basically, some form of partition. At this stage, the best deal going is some form of partition of Ukraine. I think it's a sensible policy. Now, will Trump say that? Yeah, that's the best thing for America. A partition of Ukraine, Russia gets something, we get something, it's a compromise. Or will he then think, hey, I'm going to be the president whom historians will say that I sold out Ukraine. I allowed Russia to take a big chunk of Ukraine. And so, I'll go down as somebody who's an appeaser, as someone who gave the Russians, the KGB, what they wanted. I mean, I'm not saying Trump will think that, but that's quite a possibility. That Trump isn't thinking, he's not a Ron Paul-like person. He's not a Mearsheimer type person. He's thinking about the history books. How will historians judge him? And it's saying, hey, you sold out Ukraine. Again, I don't think that he has, but he may think that I don't want to do that. I'm not going to just to do that. I'm not going to allow Russia just to take a chunk out of Ukraine. So your argument, Brown, I accept that. I think that he may well think along those lines. He may also be thinking along, the lines I've just outlined. We'll have to see. And then, we listen to these speeches, try to figure out, but it still remains an enigma which way he's going to go. I mean, we'll know once he's made clear who's in his national security team. It brings in people like O'Brien, that terrible national security advisor that he had. Then I think things look grim. Well, okay. Then okay, let's go back. So Denakis says, okay, this is a good point. Denakis says Glengarry Glen Ross sure had a lot of F words. I was rather shocked seeing it in Romanian TV in the early 2000s. I think by the amount of swear words, but it was a film I liked actually. Great actors. I agree with you there. I think Glengarry Glen Ross. I rather like that film, and you know you're right about the language, but I think on the other, I think it was a very powerful and effective film. Yeah, absolutely great actors. We've got Jack Lemmon, obviously an aging Jack Lemmon. Al Pacino was very good in it, and Kevin Spacey was his usual creepy self. Ed Harris. Yeah, a lot of great actors, and it had a good drama, and it's so I liked it. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of David Mamet, but I did like this one. Maybe we can screen that, but I don't know. Maybe Gagglers would gag on the F words. There are an awful lot of them. Steve K9 says Scorsese's Gangs of New York had some flaws, but it has an unbelievable performance by Daniel Day-Lewis as Bill the Butcher. Not one of my favorite films. Again, I didn't really like it much. I found it rather boring, to be honest. It just lacked some of Scorsese's energy. Steve says, foul language is part of the world of men, which has almost vanished in the West. Try listening to the Russian and Ukrainian soldiers fighting each other to the death. Well, I mean, I guess I think the problem that Cynthia raised is that if it's all completely overwhelmed by F words, then you're not really learning anything. You're not really getting much by way of drama. It's just the same thing over and over again. And I think that was certainly my feeling in Casino and in Wolf of Wall Street. I mean, it's just the same thing over and over again. It's like everyone talks in exactly the same way. Everyone says exactly the same thing. And it just becomes very tedious and and repetitious. So so again, one doesn't have to be prudish to say I kind of like a clever script. And again, Scorsese achieved that in Goodfellas, where again, there's plenty of foul language in that, but that was a clever script, and it was a funny script. There's precious little humor in Scorsese's later films, and then in Cape Fear, I mean, De Niro's performance was just so over the top and so ridiculous. I mean, in comparison with how well Robert Mitchum played the character, so that was Scorsese went completely bonkers with Cape Fear to allow De Niro to do it that way. Steve K9 says Whitmer instituted one of the vilest lockdowns during COVID. Absolutely correct. Awful person. She's also participated in the FBI fake right-wing kidnapping scam. No, exactly. I think she's a terrible, horrible person. This Fed scam. The Fed napping, as I think Julie Kelly calls it, clearly set up by the FBI. And she had worse COVID lockdowns, and of course she was also a hypocrite about it. And then she was, remember when they had the George Floyd riots, and she was out there, suddenly forgot all about the lockdowns because, this is a public health emergency, so we need to have people out on the street. I thought everyone was supposed to be locked down in their homes. No, we got to protest George Floyd, I mean, she was just going crazy during those George Floyd riots. Practically doing a lap dance as she did so. So I think she's one of the worst. I mean, but I don't think the case for her is at all believable. I mean, I think that I mean, I don't think Harris can be pushed out of the way. Hillary Clinton might make a pitch, but I think it's too late for her. Michelle Obama might have a say, but it's too late for her. No, I think it's I think if not Biden, it has to be Harris. There's no other choice. Babs Habit says, I have no problem with profanity or violence in films as long as it isn't gratuitous and fits the context. I think it's right. I think it's fair. Lenz LaRoque, have you screened Barry Lyndon? No, we haven't screened Barry Lyndon. There was, it's one of those. It's very beautiful to look at, but it's slow. It's definitely slow, and I don't know whether Gagglers would have the patience to sit through Barry Lyndon. But we can put that to the vote. See if people want to, because we were going to do a vote on arty films. Whether something really artsy. Maybe Barry Lyndon would be one, or well, we can't do Last Year in Marion Bad because of the subtitles issue. But we could think about some artsy films and see whether people. I suspect if we have artsy films, no one's going to show up. Anyway, Steve K9 says, if Russia continues at 1 kilometer a day, it will only take 650 more days to get to the Polish border. 650 more days. Well, that's a little less than 2 years. I think that it may be more difficult to continue at 1 kilometer a day. I think they're going to build very firm defensive lines and trenches. So I don't know if 1 kilometer a day, Russia will be able to sustain that, particularly once they start moving to the west. Bab said, you're right, Scorsese peaked long ago. Yeah. And Cynthia says, Eve Marie Saint making it to 100 is good enough reason to screen On the Waterfront this upcoming Monday night. How about it? Very good. That's a very good argument. Yeah, absolutely. But and again, to be honest, I didn't know that she was still alive. So, just found out really today that that today she's made it to 100, which is great. Dan Rock says BBC had an article today with no evidence other than what a Ukraine officer said. It stated that Russians were losing 1,500 men a day in human waves. Yeah, I mean, they're always coming up with these numbers. I've long dismissed these ridiculous stories from both sides. The Russian casualties are 10-1 the Ukrainian casualties, and then we have the other one, which is Ukrainian casualties are 7-1 what the Russian casualties are. I mean, they're all basically, all of these numbers are made up out of whole cloth. I mean, I'm going by, there have been some serious efforts made to estimate how many have been lost. They're going by newspaper notices, funerals, and so on. And according to the more reputable or more scientific estimates, they're saying something like maybe 50,000 Russians have been killed. Which I don't know whether that's true or not. At least it sounds more plausible. 50,000 since February 2024. Again, I mean, it sounds to me a lot more plausible than the loony numbers being thrown around, about 500,000 or even 1 million Russians killed. I don't think it's anything like that, and I don't think it's the same that many Ukrainians have been killed either. But this whole 1,500 men a day is just, I absolutely disagree with that. Judy Hodgkins, Judy, welcome. Thank you very much for your generosity. So Judy says, Putin just said that at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, that when asked about Trump's statements on ending the war, says, I'm not familiar with his possible proposals on how he intends to do this, and that is, of course, the key question. But I have no doubt that he says this sincerely, and we will support it. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I think that I mean, we were discussing the other day the question of Putin's statement that he prefers Biden to Trump, and I never really bought into it. I think he was just overcompensating for the irrational exuberance in 2016 when the Russians just made too many statements saying how happy they were over Trump's victory, which was then used against the Russians and against Trump to suggest that there was a Trump-Russia alliance. So now he's gone over and said, no, I'm supporting Biden, but I don't believe he is supporting Biden. I think with Biden, you would just get this endless war. No hope at all of this of the Americans abandoning the proposal. So I can see why he might think that with Trump, some things could change. Trump, after he's coming in, he doesn't want this war hanging over him for the next 4 years, and really, Trump is a deal maker. I mean, that's who he is. He is somebody who is entirely a pragmatist. That's who he has been all his life. He's never been ideological. He's never thought. He doesn't think in any ideological terms, and therefore he's very different from America's elites, from Europe's elites, and NATO elites who think in terms of this, liberal democracy, the triumph of democratic values, a kind of Fukuyama circa 1989 idea that, well, we have won the Cold War, all issues about ideological preferences have now been settled. Liberal democracy is the only way forward. Communism's gone, fascism's gone, liberal democracy, and we need to spread this around the world. That's an ideological view that's shared. Well, obviously, Biden is a huge proponent of that, as was Obama. And but Trump never had that. I mean, because Trump never really bothered reading Fukuyama. I don't know if he even knows who Fukuyama is. So he doesn't think in those terms. But as long as you're thinking in terms of the triumph of liberal democracy or New World Order, which is kind of the same thing, or the New World Order, that was George H.W. Bush, and then of course we have the rules-based order, but they're all variants on the same idea of the triumph of liberal democracy. As long as you're thinking along those lines, then wars are going to go on. Wars are inevitable, because you're always going to come against the resistance of Russia, the resistance of China, resistance of Iran. There's always going to be North Korea. You're always going to have these states that the liberals cannot stand because they stand in the way of the march of progress. And that's why it's the worst possible news when you get people like Biden and Harris who preside over the United States, because that's what they think. Liberal democracy is on the march, and we have to march with liberal democracy. Therefore, we have to defeat all of its enemies. Now, Trump did want to defeat or crush one enemy, which was Iran. But there, he wasn't really driven by, liberal democracy ideology. I think there was Israel, it was the Zionist lobby that kind of pushed him into going after Iran, into somehow waging some stupid war against Iran. I mean, not actual war, but effectively a war by restoring sanctions and so on. So you can see the Russians might be thinking, well, with Trump, we might get some fresh thinking, a kind of a pragmatic way of seeing the world, quite possible. And that's how the Russians see it. And the Russians are also very pragmatic, as are the Chinese. The problem is that pragmatism isn't a very effective bulwark against an ideology. The West is ideological. The Western policy is ideologically driven, and when you ideologically driven, you have to keep spreading that ideology and try to crush all opponents of your ideology. Russians don't think like that. You know, they abandoned communism, but they haven't really embraced anything comparable, any alternative, and that's why they're always at a disadvantage when it comes to the West. The West is driven by an ideology. The Russians aren't, and the Chinese aren't. You know, they want to do deals. They want to get rich, and I think that puts them at a disadvantage. But they might think, well, Trump is a little like us. You know, he doesn't care about the march of global democracy. He just wants to do a deal. He wants to make America rich. You know, just like we want to make Russia rich. You know, Chinese want to make China rich. So I can see why Putin would think along these lines. But going back to what we were saying earlier, who the hell knows which way Trump is actually going to go? But that's interesting, that the phrasing. I'm not familiar with his possible proposals or how he intends to do this, and that is, of course, the key question. But I have no doubt that he says this sincerely, and we will support it. Okay, it's interesting. Steve K9 says, you might be right about the Russian people getting tired of throwing away all these lives. On the other hand, leaders have tricks. Russia could provoke the West into doing something that would really rally the Russian people. But I don't think he would. Yeah, I mean, I really think that Putin is so cautious that he would, absolutely go out of his way not to do anything that would provoke a war between Russia and the West. So he's a kind of a phlegmatic sort of person. He doesn't get excited, and anything could happen, but he will actually go out of way to make sure that there isn't a shooting war between Russia and NATO. I mean, could happen, but that's why I think he is. That's why I think the New York Times was right to say it, that he is absolutely wary of extending this war beyond the borders of Ukraine, because then I think there's a real danger of getting into a shooting war with NATO. So, but as I said, I think that comes with real dangers. I mean, if you can't settle this war, you can't find a way to bring it to an end, to some kind of a satisfactory conclusion, and a conclusion ultimately when you say at the end, well, the sacrifice has been worth it, and that's the part that's can be difficult. Russians have to think, okay, well, the sacrifices have been worth it. I mean, they lost 27 million in World War II. No one questions that the sacrifices were worth it. World War I, they didn't think the sacrifices were worth it, and we got the Bolsheviks. So we have to see what happens. R. Brown says, it is better for Russia and the plan to slowly grind down Ukraine without a major breakout to the West, under the theory that such a breakout could cause tactical nukes to be deployed, which is likely to go. Is it better likely to go full-scale nuclear? Well, that's true. I mean, obviously, there's a great danger. My feeling is that it's probably better to provoke a crisis, maybe even leading to the threat of the use of nuclear weapons, in the sense that it focuses people's minds. Now that was the great thing about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It focused people's minds. Hey, we're just on the brink of a nuclear war. Something we thought couldn't happen. We're on the brink of a nuclear war, and that had a very positive effect because it led to a couple of decades of nuclear arms talks, limitations of nuclear weapons, détente, Helsinki Accords. So all sorts of good things came out of the Cuban Missile Crisis. if you keep grinding this war, you're just going to keep losing a lot of lives. And you know, you have to then think it is Slavic lives. I mean, even if it's a Russian, you know, you're losing Russian lives. Okay, that's bad enough, but you're losing Ukrainian lives. And this is, after all, Putin has said, you know, Russia and Ukraine are one people. You know, so you know, it's Slavic lives that are being lost. NATO lives are not being lost. NATO that engineered this whole thing, NATO masterminded this whole thing, but no NATO lives are being lost. There's something wrong there. Then you think Russians are going to say, there's something wrong with this picture. NATO that provoked this is sitting pretty. You know, they're not losing any lives, whereas Russian and Ukrainian lives are being lost. That's why I just don't think it can go on forever, year after year. I don't. Something is going to have to break. And then Steve, and that's why I think provoking a crisis, you know, maybe tactical nukes or whatever, may be maybe not such a bad way of trying to bring this thing to an end. I mean, it's like you want to shock people, and maybe a shock to the system is the way to bring it to an end. Steve Kane says it really could be the case that drones have ended the possibility for these big arrow offensives. Maybe. But I mean, but at the same time, I mean, Russia has not used its huge manpower advantage, which could give it this possibility for an offensive. I mean, you've got a massive population. I mean, you're 3 or 4 times the size of Ukraine. If you mobilize your forces, then you could raise armies, the kind of armies that could mount offensives. But Russia doesn't want to go down that path. Putin has said, no, we're good. You know, that partial mobilization of September 2022, that's good enough for us. We don't want any more mobilizations. Well, then I don't see how you can win this war then other than going along this grinding path, because you just don't have the kinds of massive armies you need to conduct those, you know, rapid maneuver warfare where you can, capture major cities and surround armies and so on. Anyway, Babs Habit says, right, drain Russia similar to what happened to the Soviets. Right. Drain Russia similar to what happened to the Soviets in the first Afghan war. Yeah, I think that's exactly the calculation. That's exactly what NATO is thinking. Look what we did to the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. We kind of drained them. Now, of course, they could have gone on. That wasn't really that's not the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed. Because the number of casualties in Afghanistan was quite limited. Only 15,000 Soviet forces were killed in Afghanistan over a 10-year commitment. So it's not a huge loss. I mean, you know, a hell of a lot more have been lost now. And the Soviet Union was a much bigger country than Russia's, but Russia has lost far more than the Soviet Union did in Afghanistan. So that wasn't the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed. Now, the arms race that had the Reagan arms race, that had a more of a detrimental effect on the Soviet Union, but again, that wouldn't have brought the Soviet Union to an end, because even if you say, okay, we're going to compete with the West, we're going to have to do it. We're going to, the United States, they're waging an arms race against us. We're going to have to compete in this arms race. Yeah, no consumer goods for you, no comfortable life for you. We're going to be living in poverty, but we have no other means. We have to fight against the capitalists. Well, they can still do that. I mean, the Soviet people had put up with a lot of shit over the decades. And they'll be told, yeah, you're going to, I mean, there wasn't really any public accountability for the communist leaders. So the communist leaders could say, yeah, look, we got to do it. We got to compete with the United States. We got to have an arms race. So that wasn't the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed, because, the fact that people were living in poverty that that wouldn't necessarily be an argument against communist rule, because the communists say, well, what else can we do? We're surrounded by enemies, and we have to invest in our heavy industry, and we have to invest in our armaments. We have to be everywhere, because otherwise our enemies will prevail against us. And I'm sorry, but we're going to have to go without nylon stockings and makeup and luxury goods and nice food and so on. So I don't think that was the reason, but that's the way the West thinks. Hey, we drained the Soviet Union dry. We forced them to their knees because we forced them to spend more on Afghanistan, on the arms race, and so on. Let's see. Go back, and then Mary says the Russian pranksters fooled Hillary recently. Yes, yes, they did. Yeah, it's actually very funny. And I'm always amazed how they pull these things off, because everyone, all these people are taken in by them. I mean, let's say if I'm sitting there and I get a call, oh, this is Poroshenko. And you don't even hesitate and then say, well, really? I mean, you don't sound like Poroshenko. I mean, yeah, and particularly when that so many people have been pranked already, but they were this Cameron or Hillary Clinton, they all get they get pranked by these people. What's interesting is how they get these phone numbers. I mean, obviously, the Russian intelligence services are providing these phone numbers, which itself is kind of interesting that they know the personal phones of David Cameron, the foreign secretary. They know the personal phone number of Hillary Clinton, and all the woman, the head of the European Central Bank. The Russians have all of their personal phone numbers. Steve K9 says Gorka is a fanatic anti-communist. Even the slightest whiff is enough. Yeah, no, he's completely demented. But he's a kind of John McCain. I mean, he's demented about Islamism. He's demented, whatever it is, he's demented about it. And he wants to, go to war against anyone. I mean, Trump has him around. Well, he does this radio show, and I guess maybe that radio show that Gorka has a reach. I don't know what the reach is, but I think it's Bannon probably insists on having Gorka around. I mean, Bannon got this job as what was a chief strategist in Trump's first term, and then Bannon brought Gorka in with him, and then when Trump got tired of Bannon, because Bannon was spent too much time chatting with journalists, Trump fired Bannon. And the moment Bannon was out the door, Gorka was out with him. I mean, it was just immediate, that in other words, Gorka had no independent existence in the Trump White House other than through Bannon. So that Bannon is Gorka's meal ticket. Lenz Laika says it's China Bannon is obsessed with. Yes, you're right. He is obsessed with China. However, he is kind of strangely obsessed with this whole thing about Russia and the KGB. I don't. It's something. It's going on and on about how the Russia is run by the KGB and because of Putin. So you're right. Russia for him isn't particularly important. But he's not going to push Trump, I don't think, to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. I just don't think that he's going to do that. Lenz Laika says Trump has been leaning heavy towards blacks, and it's working. It will be Scott. I don't know. I'm not sure it's working. It's hard to tell. I mean, I was looking at the poll, that New York Times Siena poll. It doesn't look like Trump has made much of a headway with blacks. He's made a headway among Hispanics. He's winning among Hispanics, but with the blacks, it's still He's still in the sort of 10, 12%. He hasn't made, all the big talk about that's going to get 25, 30% of the black vote. The polls don't suggest that he's going to get anything like 25, 30%. And I don't think Scott would help him. Then Cynthia says about the so William Taylor says, if you don't like the way the movie voting is going, you should name yourself as a super delegate and cast 100 votes for your favorite. That's a good idea. Really, it's a good idea. And then Cynthia replies, the problem is there's a tie this time, and George has to find some way to come up with a winner, and I'm just trying to help him make that decision. No, I think that's good. If it is going to be a tie between On the Waterfront and Blue Collar, I'm persuaded by your argument, Cynthia, that in honor of Eve Marie Saint being still alive and 100 years old, I think it should be On the Waterfront. Yes. And I think generally, I think it's a better film than Blue Collar. But again, I'd much rather if it was I'm All Right, Jack had won it, but it didn't win. So I have to accept the democratic will, the rule, the tyranny of the majority. Anyway, Lenzlaker says, I know nothing about Scott. I assumed he was charismatic. No, he's anything but charismatic. But he's extremely boring, and he's also very poor, at reading the room. I mean, he decided to run as a kind of Morning in America type candidate. He was trying to bring back Reagan circa 1984. Well, no one in America feels that this is Morning in America. No one really thinks that, hey, we're living in a kind of revived Reagan era. It's the wrong time for it. And the fact that you thought that there would be any bias for a revived Reagan, it just shows that you don't understand politics. You have to know how to read a room. You have to know what the feeling is. And that's what Trump is very good at. He's very good at reading the room. He knows how people are thinking, and he's never, I mean, when he tried in his first term to do, I mean, he did have kind of very pessimistic vision of America in his campaign 2016. It was successful, but then he turned around as soon as he became president and did more or less a kind of a Morning in America routine. Everything is fantastic. The economy is fantastic, and that didn't go well. So it's just not where America is. I mean, America's just, you look at these polls about, right direction, wrong direction of the country. This is huge majority for the wrong direction. So not the time to do, wheel out Ronald Reagan. Babs Habit says, at least LBJ had the good grace to resign and retire to his ranch to drink himself to death. And he said, that bitch of a war killed the woman I love, the Great Society. Yeah, I mean, he did. I mean, when you said he has the good grace, he didn't really have the good grace. He did very poorly in the New Hampshire primary. But then he got the worst news of all, which was that Bobby Kennedy decided to throw his hat in the ring and to challenge Johnson. And that triggered Johnson's resignation. And I just don't feel there's any dignity in that. He was just too scared to take on Bobby. I mean, he had this inferiority complex towards the Kennedys, the people around the Kennedys, and he was just not up to facing Bobby. I think he could have beaten Bobby, but he just dreaded the idea of the whole Kennedy clan ganging up on him, and so he resigned. So I don't know whether he had the good grace exactly. I mean, it was a cowardly thing to do. And then he started negotiating uh, an end to Vietnam, which I don't really think, once you're a lame duck president, I just don't think that's what you can do. I mean, if you're a lame duck, you're lame duck. You're not really in the race anymore. So he kind of did that. Of course, it went nowhere. And then he tried to blame it on Nixon and so on. So, he started putting out the story that Nixon was sabotaging his negotiations to end the Vietnam War. So I don't think he had any good grace. It was a very undignified exit, and so that the I don't think he was much of a president. I mean, he was a master of the Senate. He knew how to get votes, twist arms, and so on. But the notion that he's some great president is just the record suggests otherwise. Anyway, Lenslark says Glengarry Glen Ross is epic. Yeah, I like that. Babs Abbott says Glengarry Glen Ross is good for some Monday night flick. So, Cynthia, I don't know if you've seen Glengarry Glen Ross. I mean, if you think it's a suitable film, then would it be? And we're going to have a vote on it. What would be contenders? What for Glengarry Glen Ross? What would be film so that we can make a decision on a vote? Then Jonathan says, could be wrong, but an early exit poll out of Britain shows the Conservatives winning 0 seats. If true, Nigel Farage must be smiling like a Cheshire cat. Well, that's interesting. So it's now, in the UK it's 10:24 p.m. So the polling places have closed, so they will be publishing exit polls. Well, that I don't know. Exit polls have been wrong before. 0 seats sounds a little. I mean, it'd be great if it's true, but it does sound a little extreme. I can't believe it's 0. There will be some places with conservative. I mean, you just don't have anyone else but a conservative candidate. I mean, no one else there really are to challenge a conservative. I mean, there are some seats like that. So I find it surprising that they get 0. They get at least a handful. William Taylor says the way the virus suddenly became no big deal during the George Floyd riots was pretty clear indication that it was all BS. I couldn't agree with you more. I didn't write the word out since we're talking about it too much profanity. It's okay. BS is fine. No, I mean, you're right. It was just fascinating how when all the George Floyd riots started, and everyone forget, well, what about the lockdowns? Wasn't everybody supposed to stay in their homes and not go out, not walk the dog, not get any fresh air? And then it was apparently fine. Not just everyone was out, in proximity to one another. So hey, but what about the lockdowns? And Gretchen Whitmer, she was out there. She was in the forefront of those protests. And she kind of looked as if she was just doing a lap dance. I mean, she was surrounded by kind of big guys when she was, marching for Floyd, and it just looked like she was giving them a lap dance. It was quite grotesque. Babs Abbott says it could feel like Scorsese was a one-trick pony with so many gangster-themed movies. Agreed, Mitchum and CF original. Cape Fear original are superior. De Niro's performance was so over the top, it was practically unwatchable. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It was terrible. I mean, Nick Nolte, who played the Gregory Peck character, I think he did it in an interesting way because he at least provided a motive for why what was he? Max Cady, I think his name was, why he hated him so much, because he was a slimy defense lawyer who buried a report, and so he didn't do what he was supposed to do for his client. And so you can see why, somebody would have a motive to get even with him. Whereas in the original, it wasn't clear what Cady's motive was to go after Gregory Peck. But Mitchum was just good. Mitchum was able to convey a certain icy charm and a kind of menace and a certain sex appeal. He's able to. He had that quality in a lot of the parts he played. So I think it was, De Niro was just ridiculous. And again, I'm not sure why Scorsese thought that this would be good for De Niro to play it like that. Steve K9 says 650 days was not serious; it was mocking. Oh, I see. Okay, all right. But yeah, but I mean, the point is that I'm not buying the idea that Russia has the time and somehow, we're in no hurry, we can just go on fighting this war. No, nobody has time. Nobody can go on fighting a war. I mean, that's you're always going against the clock because the time will always be running out. People's patience wears thin, and particularly if you're losing casualties at this rate. Again, the Americans they put up with Vietnam for quite a long time, even though Vietnam didn't have that much to do with Americans' national security. But there came a point at which they said, we've had enough. We're just not going to go on with this. Not going to go on supporting this war, which doesn't seem to have any ending. And it doesn't look like we're ever going to achieve any of the goals that we're trying to achieve. And with the moment people say that, we're never going to achieve those goals, then that's it. It's over. You've lost the public's support, and then you have to you have to find some way of withdrawing without a total humiliation, and disaster, and debacle for your country. And that's that's something that could happen. Anyway, it goes on. Yeah, and then Babs Habis says. Oh, no, Babs Habis says Whitmer scares the shit out of me. Big scary Hillary vibes. Yeah, I agree. She doesn't, there's something about her that's very unappealing. And then Babs says, arts film lover here. I prefer to see movies that I haven't seen before, especially ones with the good reviews, rather than ones I've seen a dozen times, like On the Waterfront. Yeah, no, I take your point. I mean, I make these polls. I put up these polls, and that's why I always hope that the winner will be a film that has rarely been seen, because I think but somehow it's often the best known film that wins the poll. So that's why when we had the Orson Welles poll, I was hoping that it'll be one of Orson Welles' less familiar films that would win, but no, it was Touch of Evil. So but that's it. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. William Taylor says liberal democracy is window dressing. Yeah, it could morph overnight into something else in order to keep endless war going. Wars didn't stop after the Cold War, just needed new marketing. I agree with you. I agree, and I think, but that's the great thing about an ideology, is that once you've got it in place, then it justifies the war. So we got, how do you justify this war in Ukraine? If it's just going to be, well, the borders of Ukraine, the eastern border of Ukraine, then, well, that doesn't sound very justifiable. I mean, why are we fighting a war about the eastern borders of Ukraine? But if you make it about the liberal democracy, if we make it about our way of life, about people living in freedom and all the rest of the claptrap, then you've got a justification for the war. So that's why it's important that you keep this ideology going, because then it justifies everything. If you make it very pragmatic, you make it, it's about what's the eastern borders of Ukraine, then yeah, you're not gonna get much support for it. But that's why it's so important to have this Fukuyama-like vision of, well, this is where we're heading, And unfortunately, there are people who are resisting. So we have to break their resistance to liberal democracy. Anyway, Babs Habit says, Trump is indeed a deal maker, which means he might even talk to the Russians, unlike these clowns. Egregious diplomatic malpractice out of the US State Department. I agree, and I think he wanted to do that during his first term, but unfortunately, there were people who were determined to sabotage it, and unfortunately, also, he didn't resist sufficiently. So we had the disaster in Helsinki, and then he didn't follow through, and instead was caught up in the whole Skripal's nonsense and expelling Russian diplomats, closing down Russian consulates, and so his plan to work something out with Putin, didn't materialize. So again, maybe it'll be different this time, but again, that happened. Cynthia says, another amazing thing about Eve Marie Saint is that she married a guy who was younger than herself and still managed to outlive him. Well, that often happens, when people reach the age of 100, they obviously not only outlive their spouses, but they often outlive their own children. And sometimes even outlive their own grandchildren, because you go 100, you're 100, your children, they're probably in their 70s, and well, people die before they reach the mid 70s. So that I mean, that's the downside of reaching such old age. I mean, we all think, oh, this is great, she's 100 and so on, but it also means that practically all of the people who were your friends, your relatives, people she was married to, they've all gone. So it's a sort of the sad aspect of living such a long time, which is that it could be quite lonely. And then Bab says, liberals have paved the way for Christian fascism. These fading neocon, neoliberal projects have driven many people to embrace any other option. Yeah, I agree. And then Bab says, Bill Clinton encouraged Trump to run in 2016 because they believed Trump would be easier to beat. Yep. Hillary was so unpopular, there aren't many candidates that can legitimately lose to Hillary. That's where the rigging comes in. Yeah, I agree. I think that the thing is, though, that Hillary, I mean, we all say this now, Hillary is very unpopular, but she did quite well in 2008, and the Obama won, but Obama won quite narrowly, and he won because of the caucuses. It was the states that held caucuses rather than primaries with a popular vote. That's where all the Obama organizers they put together these caucuses, these small groups, and that's how Obama prevailed. But in the primaries, where actually voters went to vote, Hillary did very well. So it was, just so in terms of the popular vote within the Democratic Party, Hillary did better than Obama. So if you go to 2016, you might think, okay, well, she did pretty well in 2008. And so, why not? Why would she be so terrible? So it wasn't as obvious then as it is now that she's so hopelessly unpopular. Now we say, yeah, I mean, she's really, oh, she's so terrible, and no one would vote for her. Well, they did vote for her in 2008, and it was just simply the whole Obama machine that managed to knock her out. So that's why when Obama told Biden to step aside and let Hillary run, I think I mean, no, yeah, Obama, yeah, Obama told him. So, I think Obama's thought that Hillary would have a better chance of beating Trump than Biden would. And it wasn't a wholly wrong calculation, because there were all sorts of issues about Biden involving Burisma and the corruption and the sleaze, and which Obama knew all about that. And Obama probably felt, hey, these things are going to come out in any election. It's going to be an embarrassment, and that Biden will lose. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but again, it was a reasonable decision on Obama's part. I mean, I know everyone now says, oh, Obama got it completely wrong in 2016. Oh, he should have told Hillary that you can't run, and that if Biden had run in 2016, Biden would have defeated Trump. I'm not at all sure about that. Anyway, R. Brown says, is it just me, or has the EU leadership always been manned by the grandkids of Nazi Gauleiters, Waffen-SS, and the like? We have some pedigree type here in the US, Nazi bankers and industrial guys. Yeah, I think that was always, particularly NATO, the NATO people, there were always people who had played a prominent role in the Wehrmacht, and it was interesting. It was kind of overlooked for many years, and that somehow that these were problems. I mean, the idea was, well, okay, they weren't really very ideological. They were just part of, the Wehrmacht. So why not use them, within NATO? After all, who else are you going to use? I mean, if you're going to have Germany in NATO, then you're obviously going to use Germans who have military experience, Germans who know how to fight a war. Well, those people had fought in World War II, and and who are the best? Well, the best are the ones who rose to senior positions within the Wehrmacht. No one ever questioned the military prowess and skills of the German generals. So therefore you say, well, okay, we need NATO to be as strong as it can be. So we're going to bring in all these German generals who had played a prominent role within the Wehrmacht. And it's now in retrospect, it's quite amazing how many of them held senior positions within NATO, having held all these positions, senior positions within the Wehrmacht. And so yeah, it was always there. But what's kind of interesting is that these people, particularly with the Greens, who are gung-ho for war against Russia, they tend to be the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of, again, prominent Nazis. And it has been pointed out, and maybe that's a subject for another day, that there is a certain overlap between the Nazi ideology of worship of nature and soil and this anti-industrial perspectives, and the Greens, who also kind of worship nature and hate industry. So it kind of, there is a certain continuity, not just a biographical continuity that, somebody like, Annalena Baerbock, her grandfather, prominent figure within the Wehrmacht. And then the Hasbeck, I think the other kind of the leader of the Greens, great grandfather, prominent Nazi. So kind of interesting, whether there is a continuity between that nature worship and anti-industrial ideology of the Nazis and the Greens. Anyway, Summer Petrus Your State, BBC exit poll, Labour on 410, Tories on 131. That sounds about right. Liberals on 61, Reform 13, SNP on 10, Greens on 2. Unfortunately, yeah, that is unfortunate. So the Tories. So that's 410. So if you add that up, that's 192, 205, 215, 217. So it's a majority of 193. Okay. That's a big majority. That's among the biggest majorities, but it's not quite the blowout that we were expecting. But it's still, it's a huge majority. But I mean, at least the Tories. I mean, I thought 0 seats would not happen, but yeah. But a majority of 193. That's, I think, bigger than Blair's majority in 1997. The Summer Petrol says majority for Labour 170. Well, that's not according to the exit poll, but 170 again. That's probably. I mean, it's a very good result, but not quite as big as we were expecting. Okay, and then so Danaki says again. Danaki says, where was Danaki? Yeah, BBC breaking news. Labour set to win general election, landslide, majority of 170. Okay, 410 was Labour. 326 needed for majority. Yeah, but you have to. Yeah, no, that's correct. Danrock says, what did you think of The Usual Suspects, George? I'm just not a huge fan of what's his face, the guy who made The Usual Suspects and Pulp Fiction and it's going late. Quentin Tarantino. Not a huge fan of Tarantino. There's something about his sensibility that I've never liked. Or am I? Did he make? No, he didn't make The Usual Suspects. Sorry. The Usual Suspects was that was okay. Now I was thinking about the other one. I'm confusing with Tarantino. I mean, it was okay. It's not one of my favorite films. I've so but it was okay. Just it's not my sort of thing. Which okay. Well, this one. Beat TV. The movie is very intense. Okay, Sino talking about this movie. Story about Russian man accused of collaborating with the Nazis, trying to salvage his dignity. Okay, that's interesting. Babs Sabbath says, please keep offering. I'm all right, Jack. All right. If you are, since you are so nice, I will. Sino, thank you very much for your generosity. Really appreciate it. And Babs Sabbath says RFK run was the primary reason why LBJ dropped out. Yeah, that's it. He just ran ran for cover. Just got terrified of this. I mean, it was a very strange thing with him. His bizarre relationship with the Kennedys. Why he feels so inferior to them, to the point where he never even brought in any of his own people. He kept everyone in place who he knew their primary loyalty to Kennedy. They had no loyalty to Johnson at all. Some of them absolutely loathed Johnson, but he kept everybody in place. And it just showed a deep inferiority complex that he had towards the Kennedys. And so when Bobby announced he was running, that was his nightmare come true, that he was going to be up against the Kennedys. Anyway. And Babs said, good grace was kind of tongue-in-cheek. He wasn't a great president. He was a failure. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a very good book to read is was written by Godfrey Hodgson. Oh God, I'll think of it. But it was very much a record of. I can look this up. This is ridiculous because it's that I'll come with that. Let me just find so that I can. Since I'm making a book recommendation, should at least get the title. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, the good book to read on that is Godfrey Hodgson's book, America in Our Time. And that was very much a view of Johnson's America. And it was a very, very different view from the usual kind of nostalgia. Oh, the civil rights movement and how everyone was in love with the civil rights movement. So it was a much darker view of America. And above all, the Great Society programs that that were an absolute disaster, the Great Society programs, and that Democratic city mayors were coming to the Oval Office and telling Johnson, you're nuts. This money, this Great Society programs, they're essentially money that's flowing into street gangs. They're going to gangsters. We're losing control of our cities because of your Great Society programs. So it's all written about very well in America in Our Time by Godfrey Hodgson. I think he wrote that in the 1970s. I think it's a good book. Anyway, Bab says Nick Nolte is underrated, and Who Stopped the Rain with a Robert Stone screenplay. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. Your Usual Suspects was very gimmicky, says Lenz Larky. Yeah, kind of agree. Usual was Bryan Singer. Yeah, Bryan Singer is that really is scandalous character in Hollywood. Endless accusations against him of molesting young boys. And I'm not even sure whether he's still active in Hollywood because there have been so many accusations against him of molesting young boys. So I don't know whether he's still allowed to make films. But I mean, he was certainly a talented figure, but definitely a very disreputable character. Anyway, my time is long past up, and I'll go and catch up with what's going on in the election in the UK. It sounds from these news flashes that we're getting here is that the forecast is pretty close to what the polls were predicting. That's kind of what we were thinking. That's Labour majority. Interesting though, whether if reform continues, then reform is doing a lot better than we had anticipated, because I thought maybe reform would just simply not be able to make it because of the first past the poll system. So be interesting to see how many MPs they end up with. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you above all for your generosity. Those who contributed. I really appreciate that. It's so helpful to us, and it's very, very kind of you. Really appreciate that. Let's keep thinking about the films, what movies we want to see, what films we can suggest for having a vote. Artsy films, if you can come up with a few titles, and then we can put it to a vote. And then we'll see about on the waterfront. I'm persuaded by Cynthia's recommendation in honor of Eve Marie Saint. I think we should show On the Waterfront. Anyway, thank you very much for tonight. Really appreciate it. We will be back with the Gaggle over the weekend, and we're going to do this again next Tuesday. So thank you, and good night. See you then. All the best. Bye-bye.